certainly the news portal of choice for many of us. He's also the editorial director of BBC Global News Limited. Jamie is based in London, and he is here in Hong Kong this week for training and meet the various partners that we have in Hong Kong. So Jamie will be speaking, but then after that, there'll be time for Q&A, and everything is on the record. Feel free to ask whatever you like. And Jamie will be obliged to answer these questions. So round of applause for Jamie Angus.
Thank you, Juliana. Well, thank you very much, Juliana, and thank you very much to all of you for welcoming me here this evening. I just wanted to say I'd been to the Foreign Correspondents Club before the last time I was here, and I was very impressed and met some of you downstairs for a drink. This is the first time I've been invited upstairs into the heart of the dairy, what I understand was a dairy building and an ice house, which is most pleasant in the current climate for an Englishman who's struggling to adjust. But I wanted to say just very briefly about the amazing history of the club and what great esteem it's held in by your own population here in Hong Kong. As I'm sure you know, we were training some new staff for BBC News this week. And they are new staff who are joining us to expand our language services, additional staff for our Chinese service, and new staff for our Thai and Indonesian service, and we're training them here in Hong Kong. And when we mentioned that we were coming here this evening, they are with us here this evening, we mentioned they were coming this evening, there was an audible gasp of anticipation, I would say, and astonishment. And when we asked them why this was, they said, well, the FCC is such a highly regarded institution, it's very difficult normally to get in there for a drink. So they for one, and I too, am extremely honoured to be invited here this evening. Now, I'm going to speak probably only for about 10 minutes, and I really want you to ask me tricky questions afterwards, because it's a case of the boot being on the other foot, if you like. I have a stump speech that, like a sort of presidential candidate, I trail around the place giving the same speech everywhere. So I've jettisoned my stump speech this evening because I've been talking about fake news all year, and I have this sort of fake news stump speech that I could do in my sleep, and I sometimes do it in my sleep. And I'm sort of a bit bored of that, so I'm not going to talk to you about fake news this evening. I'm going to talk to you about something else. And I'm going to read a little bit of it from a script, from apologies, because I'm slightly talking off my normal area of expertise. Because you see, I'm a reformed news person, so I've spent my whole life mainly in the public service part of the BBC, so the non-commercial part of the BBC. So I've held a number of editors' jobs in the UK as the editor of the Today programme, the editor of Newsnight, and some of our other leading programmes in the UK. And we're very privileged that those programmes don't have to deal with the commercial space. They're funded by the licence fee. You don't have to sell advertising. You don't have to worry about where the money comes from. And part of the interesting things about my new role is that I'm now working in a highly commercialised environment, and a lot of my day job involves helping the editorial teams and the advertising teams to work together to sell advertising on the BBC World News channel and on the BBC News website, both of which carry advertising, which any of you in marketing, you may purchase at a very reasonable rate, and I'll be around afterwards to talk to you about that. So I'm going to talk off my book a bit this evening. I'm going to talk about the future of TV advertising. So I'm going to begin by asking you to do something you probably haven't done for a while, which is to sit just for 2 minutes and watch a TV advertisement as a piece of content rather than something you might see in the background. And I hope when you've finished watching it, you will agree that it was 2 minutes of your life well spent. So here we go.
She packed my bags last night, pre-flight. 0 hour, 9 a.m.
I wondered what you thought was interesting about this clip. Is it that it has incredibly high production values, that it has great storytelling, great wit and creativity, or was it that you felt that it was a really effective bit of brand management and placing? I wanted to dwell briefly on what a piece of advertising like this means to a manufacturer like Samsung, and why they might spend on it what they have, both in terms of the production of the ad spot and the delivery. So I'll talk a bit about the upsides of digital advertising in a moment, but first, let's be honest that a spot like that one is highly effective on a TV platform. Why? Well, a larger screen gives you a great cinematic and immersive effect for a high-quality piece of advertising like this. But there's another reason why brands would spend big on content like this. Only the TV platform really has the visibility and the impact fundamentally to shift an audience's perception of a brand. Here, Samsung have decided to move quite decisively into the VR sector, into virtual reality. And they need to tell the world about that, and it's simply inconceivable that they would do so without the TV platform. TV advertising not only has a measurably superior experience on a big screen with sound, but you can also, as an advertiser and a marketeer, ensure that it's placed around premium content, whether that's a Super Bowl moment, great entertainment, or even, dare I say it, world-beating international news content. It can generate what my advertising colleagues call the water cooler moment, of huge value to a brand like Samsung. So here then is the reason that around the world in the biggest ad markets, leading brands are still queuing up to spend money on TV spots. In their report of the New York Spring ad sales events this year, and this is where advertisers sell their advertising at a discount for the autumn season to ad clients in New York. The New York Times came up with a quote which I really liked from an analyst called Brian Weiser, who said, TV advertising was as archaic as water through pipes. And I love this quote. It sums up why TV advertising still has such immense resilience in the digital world. He went on to say, you could set up a drone to take water from a reservoir and use fascinating technology and cutting-edge approaches to deliver it, but there's a good reason why we still use pipes. So let's be clear, though, about the challenges our TV advertising market faces. Some have been with us for a while, like ad skipping on catch-up or over-the-top services, Netflix and so on, which are wholly ad-free. And let's pause for a minute to look at the huge challenge posed to linear TV by Netflix, Amazon Video, Hulu, and other over-the-top operators. You probably have different ones in different territories. The subscription model is a big disruptor for the TV ad market. It encourages audience to switch to ad-free services where payment is upfront. And that payment makes its way primarily into content. The Netflix series The Crown, which deals with the early years of Queen Elizabeth's reign as Britain's monarch, you may have seen it, has been used by the BBC, has been used as a stick to beat the BBC by its critics, and is adduced as evidence that big budget quality drama has moved away decisively from legacy broadcasters to streaming services. We, of course, BBC, we won't be surprised to hear, hotly dispute this. One of the most important broadcasting events in the US this autumn is the advent of live sport on streaming channels. Amazon Instant Video will be screening Thursday night American football live for the first time in what's been seen as a decisive move into the live market. And increasingly, news broadcasters, including the BBC, are asking how to work best with over-the-top providers to ensure that news is available in the streaming TV space. Overall, though, I still believe that over-the-top services like Netflix strengthen the institution of TV. The model may be different, and many subscribers are certainly using tablets and smartphones to watch streaming services. But in my household, at the least, streaming TV is still driving the use of the large screen on the wall, and I'm sure you'll sympathise with that. Let's not gloss over some of the big structural challenges for the TV advertising market, though. For every Samsung, there are many smaller brands and buyers who are struggling to make the value they get match the huge cost of premium TV advertising. The direct response ad, the ad that says, call this number and buy an encyclopedia, is still measurably effective. If the phones ring, the advertising is working. But at a lower level of spend, it can be hard for purchasers and marketeers to assess whether the results are truly worth the cost. And for some, TV ad spend can look a little like throwing money out of a helicopter. You know it's probably reaching people, but it's hard to measure exactly how. Compare that with the total accountability of digital advertising. In a world largely hidden from consumers and those outside the ad industry, digital gives you complete data sets that can target your advertising to, say, for example, people in Hong Kong, women in Hong Kong, aged 35 to 54, women in Hong Kong aged 35 to 54 who are thinking about buying a holiday. And you can see, if you serve that advertising, whether people click through and whether they eventually purchased, which allows you to put a price on what you're spending on the adverts in the first place. For those of us running mixed advertising services, did I mention that you can buy advertising on bbcnews.com as well as on the BBC World News channel? There's a challenge. Demand for digital advertising is growing quickly and it's innovating fast, but its margins are lower, so it's harder for us to generate the profit we need to keep our commercial news services going. Let's be clear. The BBC is immensely lucky. We have a £3 billion a year public service organisation in the UK, which sits behind everything we do and strengthens all our work internationally. Other news providers face a more existential threat. They have to make the ad model work. They have to or find a different model, like the New York Times' dive into the subscription market, or the Guardian's appeal to you to give a little money, an honesty box at the end of every article you read. All those organisations will in time have to shut up shop. Let me show you, though, some more evidence for the resilience of TV. And this is my dive into PowerPoint, so forgive me. All right. Here are the BBC's international audience figures for the last measured year. So these are the World Service figures, and in a moment I'm going to show you the World News, the BBC World News English language figures. So this slide shows you World Service and language services in World Service, and you can see very clearly that almost all of our growth is coming from the TV market. So our language service TV bulletins delivered an extra 21 million viewers around the world last year. And our digital audiences are flat or in mild decrease, which is a challenge for us, I think it would be fair to say. Have a look again at the figures for Global News Limited, my day job. So this is the World News channel. BBC World News alone now is reaching 99 million people a week globally, and its audience has risen by 15 million or 12% in a year. That is, I think, an astonishing figure for what was previously seen as a legacy platform. This is hardly a market in decline in the face of the digital advance. And note too that the BBC's digital audiences are flat overall. So we are seeing great growth in social and third-party distribution, but it's currently only making up for a drop-off, a marked drop-off in traditional desktop consumption of our news. And this is a real challenge for the BBC as an organisation. We must and we should continue to grow our digital audiences. But many of those audiences are in mature markets like North America, where, frankly, a lot of the audience are already saturated with available digital news in English. So our headroom for future growth is low. No wonder then that the BBC News is still so focused on the success of BBC World News, our English language TV channel, and of our growing portfolio of TV services in other languages, including our continuous news network in Arabic and our continuous news network in Persian, and new daily bulletins in Indian regional languages such as Marathi, Telugu. This always happens to me. I'm so sorry. I do know all four of them, but I'm going to have a brain pause. Yes, thank you. Gujarati and Punjabi. Thank you, Indy. Sorry, I should have known better not to write that down. And for three new Nigerian languages, Igbo, Yoruba, and Pidgin. Can I get a nod for getting those ones right? Thank you very much. So the picture is that where we are launching new services, and we're in a phase of launching a large number of new services now on the World Service side, the UK government has given us an additional significant investment to launch new language services. because they feel that that need will not be met by the market. It should be met by a government-funded program. Almost all of that money is going to language services, and most of that is going into digital and TV. So we still see TV as an immensely important platform for those new languages. Some of those journalists are here with us this evening. So let's remind ourselves once more what audiences and advertisers really value about live TV. TV generates cultural moments that audiences can share together in a way that digital has yet to do. Let's start with sport. The immense power of the English Premier League, for example, or the Wimbledon women's tennis final, or the Super Bowl. These are experiences that are still unbeatable on large, fixed screens and often shared with friends or family. The same is true of event, drama, and entertainment. Despite the immense challenge posed by the Netflix model of streaming services, which I mentioned a little while ago, there are still vast linear audiences for event TV. Dancing with the Stars, Doctor Who, the new Doctor Who, you may have noticed, is a woman. And it then says in my speech, insert local example here. And we had a discussion in the cab as to what the best example for event local TV, and our analysis was that it is a program called, I'm going to get this wrong now, it's a program called Cooking with Grandfather? Grandpa's Kitchen, thank you, I didn't get that wrong. So Grandpa's Kitchen is my local example of event TV. Have I completely got that wrong? Has anyone seen this program in Hong Kong? Yeah, okay, like one or two of you are nodding. Okay, so the first thing I do when I go back to the UK is commission a program called Grandpa's Kitchen for the BBC. I think it's going to be very successful. We also see audiences using a first screen and a second screen. So audiences share social moments around event television in the digital space using their mobile devices while enjoying the superior experience of the larger screen. And the international space, which of course is my day job, we know that audiences are still matching digital TV, they're matching the digital experience with TV services. Your mobile device has unbeatable portability, and we see audiences shifting to breaking news first on digital devices, but also using the TV channel to check on what they've heard. We recently conducted some research in this market here in Hong Kong, our value of news research, and we found that audiences were most likely to check on breaking news they'd heard on social media on an international TV channel, happily enough. So we felt that when audiences heard about something, they would see it often on social media, but they weren't quite sure whether to trust what they'd seen in the digital space. And this goes to the fake news agenda and concerns about the reliability of what you can see in digital. And so they very, very often went to check on international TV channels and local TV channels as well as digital apps. So this is why we still see a kind of mixed economy for our TV channel, our digital services. And of course, it's the power of pictures which still drives live news services. Think of the events that we've seen this year. The inauguration of President Trump, Hong Kong's anniversary celebrations, here where we are, or tragically, the terrible fire in Grenfell Tower in London this summer. We know that audiences connect with the power of pictures on TV. And the model of the TV in the corner of the office and the hotel room, tuned to rolling news services, still works for us. It drives our audiences, as we can see from this year's BBC audience figures. There's still something aspirational about TV news channels too, isn't there? With a growing global middle class, ownership of a TV and a premium content bundle is still something to aspire to. For globally curious audiences, knowing about and understanding international news is still a mark of education, good education, ambition, and intellect. Creating compelling TV in this space, which drives these audiences, is one of our most important tasks. If you want more evidence of the value of the TV in this market, you need look no further than the number of new entrants to the international TV news space. Challenging as it is to make money in our industry, and it is challenging, believe me, many new channels are effectively now state-funded. Look at Chinese state TV, the rise of TRT, the Turkish state broadcaster, Russia Today, and of course Al Jazeera. States understand the soft power benefits of making news in English on TV. So let's be absolutely clear. In terms of the rise of digital, the direction of travel is absolutely clear and moving in one direction. We will, at some stage, reach a wholly digital future. But that doesn't mean that the larger screen experience will ever die, nor even that audiences will slow or drop off. If TV ever looked like a digital platform destined to decline, it doesn't do so now. The power of TV is with news providers for very many years to come. Thank you very much. And now, having diverted from my core topic, probably ill-advisedly, I'd be very grateful if someone would put me out of my misery by asking me a tough question that I can improvise the answer to. Yes, hello. Hi, how are you?
Here's a microphone, and
Yeah.
if you could please state your name and your affiliation, if any.
Oh. Hi, my name is Kelly Cooper. I'm a sustainability consultant, and I am with a member tonight of the FCC.
Hi, Kelly.
My question, Jamie, Mr. Angus,
It
is you just quoted that it's hard to make money in your industry.
Yeah.
What is the BBC doing, if anything, to address the gender pay gap in the UK?
That's an interesting segue into that question, and which I wasn't quite expecting so early in the evening.
Sorry
But
about that.
I think it'd be fair to say I was expecting it at some point. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this story, last week the BBC published the pay of its top paid on-air talent. And the BBC had previously opposed to doing this. It said it wasn't a good idea for a number of reasons, but the government insisted that as part of the BBC's new charter, it would and should publish the pay of all its on-air talent paid more than £150,000 a year, which it did last Wednesday. And one of the things that emerged from that was that there is a significant gender pay gap in the higher echelons of our on-air talent. And this is not something that any of us, even in senior management at the BBC, feel comfortable about. And indeed, we've accepted for some time that it needs to be resolved, and we've been moving towards equalising pay in the higher echelons of on-air talent for some time. The figures that were published, incidentally, last year, the figures that were published last week are kind of last year's figures, so they're kind of a year out of date, and we are confident that when next year's figures are published, the direction of travel will be very clear and will be seen to have taken the decisive action that we have been talking about for a number of years on this issue. But I think it would be fair to say that there is a much wider issue about gender pay discrimination that is not actually unique to the BBC, nor is it unique to the broadcasting industry. And one of the interesting things that I think comes out of the BBC pay disclosure row is it probably forces all employers, certainly all employers in the media space, to take a look at their salary structure and think, what if this happened to me? Because it's all very well people throwing rocks at the BBC, where they will doubtless continue to do that. That's fine, that's part and parcel of the working for the BBC. I make absolutely no complaint about that. And actually, the criticism in this area certainly has some justification in fact. But I think there's a much wider question about, as pay disclosure widens as a phenomenon, not just in my world, but in all of your worlds, what will that show? And how do organisations show that they're serious about it? So I think organisations have to do more than pay lip service. They have to come up with working environments that are favourable to women, that treat women equally, respectfully, and value women and men's contributions the same. And that probably starts with a state-funded broadcaster before it reaches a wholly commercial company. But I wouldn't say it would have been a particularly comfortable week for anyone in the BBC. But you know, if you work in the I've been in the BBC for nearly 19 years, and there's always a row about something. So this is my analysis. So that was what the row was last week. But I think it's a serious row, and one that we shouldn't. Has that answered your question? Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for asking it. Thank you for getting it out of the way, though. So yes, Andrew, hi.
Okay, I work for the BBC, so this might be a bit risky. We've talked about gender. What about ethnic balance on screen? One of the great changes that you've seen in the BBC, certainly domestically and internationally, over the past 20 years is that you get a broader range, a broader mix of people from different ethnicities. Now, it's very easy to perhaps to do targets for gender balance. You have 50% male, 50% women. What do you think is the right ethnic balance for BBC International Television, given that at the moment there are lots of perhaps white people on, but actually if you look at the composition of the world's population, then you should actually be having perhaps a quarter of the presenters and on-screen staff should be East Asian, a quarter of them should be South Asian, and a mix of the rest.
Thank you. It's a perceptive and testing question, because what the BBC looks like on air should probably reflect its audiences as much as the staff who work there. And I think in the international divisions of the BBC, we like to think that our staff do reflect our audiences, so the two shouldn't be too far apart. And one of the very welcome things about working in the World Service is the extraordinary diversity of our staff, our BAME balance, if you like. If you look at just the World Service Group, is very favourable, admirable, and as it should be. But that's kind of inevitable, and it should be that way because we recruit our staff from around the world. Many of them work in London, others work overseas, and our staff reflect our audience makeup. I think it's difficult to sort of target particular ethnic groups, in terms of the audiences in particular regions, because that just looks like a bit of a sort of tokenistic box-ticking exercise. I think it's rather more important that across the piece, the channel looks international. The BBC World News channel looks international in a way that other international news channels do. But I'm quite reluctant to sort of overly engineer that. I think the way it should work is we should recruit the best people from around the world. They will be talented and able people, and they will make their way onto the screen on a process of merit. And if we've got that right, then the channel will look diverse as our workforce is diverse. I was very proud to be, when I was the editor of the Today programme, until about 8 months ago, I was the editor who appointed Michelle Hussain to be the presenter of the Today programme on Radio 4 in the UK. It was a very proud moment for me because I'd worked with Michelle on BBC World News internationally in a previous life, and I was absolutely confident that she would fulfil that incredibly high-profile job in the UK output as well as she has done. But that was a proud moment for me and for the programme, for the BBC. I think it was a really important moment to have a woman Muslim presenter of English and Pakistani origin, and Michelle's father's Pakistani, to join the profile of its most important single domestic news programme. It was a big moment for the programme, for me personally, and certainly for Michelle. I think it's important for the BBC to do things like that, but it can't just be a kind of token exercise around specific individuals. It's got to be an absolute culture and working culture, and I think broadly we do well on that. Thank you.
Hi, Andrew People from the Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. I was quite interested with the slide on the breakdown of the audience. I was quite surprised actually that the digital audience seemed relatively low. And I just wonder how I wonder how those stats are put together, because I wonder if people who say they're looking at BBC News TV are actually watching some clip online or something else.
Yes.
First of all, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how the stats are put together, and secondly, what's happening with the digital side of things? Is it because the audience is basically still in the UK based for sort of things like BBC.com and so on, or can you just give a bit of granularity on that?
So I think the sort of secret source of the BBC global audience measure is sort of mind-bogglingly complicated. So I won't detain you with the full details of it, but we basically measure audiences in a load of different territories, some yearly, some not. The digital audiences are a lot easier to measure because obviously you can literally measure them, whereas the TV audiences you can't, you have to conduct surveys. And then we do an extensive sort of deduping operation to avoid counting people more than once, which is why the total number doesn't add up to the same as the individual platforms. You make a really interesting point that is sort of front and centre of my world. So we've been given a target by the Director General of the BBC to reach 500 million people a week by 2022. And actually, we're well on the way to that. We're already at 379 or something like that. So we're going to get there. We'll get to 500 million. That's okay. The more testing part of the target is that 25% of those audiences should be digital. And the figures speak for themselves. We aren't there yet. And this is partly why I wanted to give the speech this evening, because I think there is a widespread assumption that digital is racing ahead incredibly quickly and TV is somehow yesterday's platform. And my interpretation of our own figures is that that is not the case. I don't think that's a huge problem yet, but I think that growing the digital audience is tough in mature markets. So I mentioned this, if you've got a market like the US or the UK, where the digital audience is rammed already with loads of great high quality competing offers, it's very hard for you to produce additional digital growth in those markets in sort of headline number terms. So actually emerging markets for us, so we have some staff here are joining the BBC Indonesian service, our expanded BBC Indonesian service. So to me, having a really exciting and vibrant Indonesian platform that is very, very digital focused and very focused on digital growth is incredibly important, because that is a huge population base of 180 million people. Not many of them are consuming digital news. Lots of them could be. If we could grow, 40 million digital users in Indonesia, that's an achievable aim for the BBC, but it requires a kind of strategic focus to do something like that. So unusually, the BBC, unlike a commercial or more purely commercial operation like your own, the BBC is in the reach business as well as the revenue business. So I run a part of the BBC that actually makes commercial revenue, but the World Service Group as a whole is in the reach business. We've got to reach 500 million people. A quarter of them should be on digital platforms. So we are, able and willing to grow digital audiences even when there's no revenue in it, which is at once a great thing. It's part of the sort of, what the World Service's mission is around the world. But it's testing for us, because we have to find new populations coming into digital platforms where there's huge headroom for growth. Would one of our students I think one of the students, I know we brought at least four students along with us this evening, so I'm very keen that one of them gets to ask a question. So
don't be shy.
Would you like to
this
pluck up your courage?
That you've asked a question in front of a group of people, that's fine. You'll be doing this all the time.
While you think of your question, so Raymond Lee, my former colleague from the BBC Chinese Service, is here and is the... okay, we've got one more over here.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to defend John Humphreys, but do you think he's a better journalist and more people want to listen to him, and he's very good at cross-examining people, and he should be paid more than other journalists? I mean... Yeah, I would like to think that the BBC has actually been paying people fairly on ability.
Yeah, so I was John's editor on Today for 3.5 years. I count John as a personal friend, and I admire him enormously. Working with John was one of the great, moments of my career, for all his occasional frustrations, and I'm sure my occasional frustrations as a colleague. He's a genuinely outstanding talent who the BBC is very lucky to have, and he should be paid quite a lot of money. So I'm not advocating a sort of a return to a sort of a completely flat pay structure for talent. I think absolutely talent pay is a competitive market. The BBC should pay at a discount to the market, so it should not pay, the BBC has stated this, that it does not and should not pay full market rate to avoid wage inflation, because we're a public service broadcaster and we're essentially spending the public's money. But I don't have a problem with some broadcasters being paid more than others. And I don't have a problem with some broadcasters being paid quite a bit more than some others. John's been a presenter of the BBC, presented Today for 30 years. He's been at the BBC for over 40 years. He's one of the BBC's greatest asset, but crucially he's an asset to the audience, and the audience value him very highly, and I think it's reasonable for that to be reflected in his pay. That's not to say I'm not going to set John's pay, and I don't set John's pay, happily. But I think the point I'm making is that what has been revealed is a wider systemic issue around gender pay, as well as, because everyone can play presenter bingo and say, I like this presenter, they should be paid a lot, but I've never listened to that presenter, so why are they paid £500,000 a year? You know, that in the end comes down to what you consume. So if you consume a lot of one platform but not another, you don't understand why they're paying their presenters so much. And so you have to kind of take a big step back from that and say, what's the right way to set pay? What's a fair way? But crucially, when we look at the whole thing in the round, it looks like it's treating every sector, gender, race group of our staff fairly. Right, students, you've had 2 minutes of waffle to think of a question, so off you go.
Okay.
Where are you from?
I'm Angela Chern. I'm from Hong Kong Baptist University.
Right, the Baptist University got in first, so if you're here from Hong Kong University, you know, you've got another 2 minutes to think of a question.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing the commercial to us. I was wondering, how do you anticipate the next 20 years or 10 years of the digital journalism? Because right now, a lot of news outlets, they are all trying all sorts of new technology like virtual reality, augmented reality. And I'd like to share your perspective on this issue, how should we fully construct a more compelling story using these kind of technology while not just following the trend of using advanced technology.
Sure.
And yeah.
It's a very perceptive question, and I'm very mindful. That's why I wanted to hear from you. I'm mindful about what's being taught to a new generation of journalists coming through who are an awful lot younger than me. So the BBC, along with everyone else, is still in. And my friend standing to your left is probably saying we're investing an awful lot in digital journalism and storytelling. Everything I've said this evening does not, for a moment, suggest that we're not investing a lot in digital. So the BBC has said this year that it's making what we call slow journalism a priority, slow news. James Harding, my boss, sort of coined this phrase, and by slow news we mean, additional long-form context, understanding of the why as well as the what, that's embedded in daily news reporting. And slow news might be a brand like Reality Check, which we're really, is our kind of fact-checking strand. Or it could be long-form journalism. We're investing a lot in data journalism, in our visual journalism teams. So I think, if you were in the BBC, 10 or 15 years ago, visual journalism meant the TV graphics department, right? And it was important but peripheral, if you like. It was a part of the production process. Now our data visual journalism teams are integral to the operation of the newsroom. And if you're a new digital service, if we're starting up the enhanced Thai digital service, being able to represent data excitingly, on digital platforms is absolutely at the heart of what would set the BBC apart from other competitors. There's really good investment for us. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. We expect the next generation of our journalists to be, at the very least, digitally skilled. They might still be working on a TV platform, but I think more and more you would see digital video. If you watch my channel, if you watch the BBC World News channel, you'll see this. You'll see what's clearly digital video running on the TV platform. I'm always told by TV people that you can't run digital video on TV, and I'm always told by digital people that you can't run TV on digital. And broadly, I've now tuned out both parties, and I just kind of, look, we're all doing one thing, and we have to kind of share around a bit. So I think you will see in your everyday experience of watching TV news how much digital is having an impact on our world. Right, okay, Hong Kong University are going to get there. Yep, you've got your hand in the air, so pass the microphone over. This is a university challenge, isn't it? You ever watch that program? Jeremy Paxman presents that in the UK.
So I actually have a couple of questions. My name is Nayatara. I'm from Hong Kong University. The first one sort of related to the question that was just asked, and I think it was going to come up eventually at some point, but what do you see happening with the rise of artificial intelligence? How do you see that going? And the second question, to give you an opportunity to give your fake news speech, is do you think reality check is sort of a product of what's going on with like the Trump administration, or do you think it's going to have a really long-term impact?
So I'll give you a very condensed version of my reality check stump in about 90 seconds. So I thought the moment that Donald Trump stood at the presidential podium and said that CNN was fake news was just like a massive moment for our industry. Because it was the moment at which it became clear that fake news was a political badge, if it was anything. You know, it wasn't actually a particularly helpful label. If it ever had been a label, it had become a sort of political weapon. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore the phenomenon and stop trying to tackle it. I also think that every news organisation, good, bad and indifferent, is now running a reality check strand. So I thought the moment at which Russia Today launched its fake check strand was another moment at which I realised that, you know, everyone's getting into this game, and everyone, you know, if you watch Fox News in the US, their tagline is fair and balanced, which is, you know, one of the BBC's taglines, right? So I think the BBC can't sort of assume that everyone thinks we're better at stuff that we do than other people. We can't make that assumption. We have to show people that we're better than other people. So we have to show that our reality check strand is better than other people's. And part of that is investment in visual journalism tools and data analysis and so on. And partly it's just keeping the BBC's sky-high reputation for accuracy and independence where it should be. So I think, yes, fake news has become politicised, absolutely for sure. And actually a lot of fake news arises in the context of political election. So when I was last travelling in this region, there was a huge fake news row in Jakarta around the Jakarta mayoral election about whether someone had done something transgressive, and it was all fake news row. So they often come up during elections. So I think everyone should proceed with caution, and you should revert to what you know and trust, if I can say it in that way. Your other question was about artificial intelligence, which there's a story, wasn't there, in the news this morning about 2 Facebook robots who had to be turned off because they were talking in a language that nobody understands. And does anyone remember the Terminator movies where, you know, the guy's going to turn on Skynet and you're going, don't turn it on, you know, and he hits the switch and then, you know, the world ends. And I think everyone thinks of that a bit when they think about artificial intelligence that we can't control. I went to see a drone company yesterday in Shenzhen, and they have these fantastic drones, but some of them looked a bit like the thing from RoboCop or Terminator, and I was thinking, like, I was just thinking in the back of my mind, what happens when the drones turn on us? You know, what's going to happen then? Who's going to look silly then? I guess probably I'm just old, you know. And I think the value to news services is that people expect increasingly AI to sort of fit in seamlessly to their news experience. So we've been doing a bit with, you know, chat bots, and so we run some chat news services where, you know, around elections, we say, okay, ask us any question you like about the Kenyan election on WhatsApp, and it will the bot will generate an answer. And we've done quite a bit of that actually, but I think it's testing because there's only so many ways you can subdivide your effort by platform. So I think one of the big tests for broadcasters is which platform do you really put where do you put your beans into one basket, you know, and have you, so if we didn't, those of us who invested, I don't think we did particularly, but people who invested in 3D TV 5 years ago probably haven't seen that much of a return for it. But people who invested in working closely with Facebook on digital news really, really have. But it was very hard to decide 5 years ago which of those platforms were going to fail and which were going to succeed. And I think one of the big tests for news broadcasters, who were quite an unsophisticated bunch in many ways, we see ourselves as sort of a trade who understand, you know, basically writing about the news. And in a sense, all of us have to become futurologists. We have to become technology and platform experts and make hard-nosed decisions about which platforms we're actually going to invest in, because you sure as heck can't invest in all of them, because then you just endlessly dilute your resources and your impact. And this is even more pressing for a wholly commercial news organisation than it is for something like the BBC.
Hi. Elaine Pickering, I'm on the Board of Governors here at the FCC. The BBC receives a large proportion of its income from TV licensing in the UK. Anyone who wants to have a TV in the UK has to pay this license. To what extent do you take into account people's opinions, people who are paying for this, about what you do with that money? And in particular, I'm thinking of Reach in Indonesia or wherever else. Do you think they care?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for a period between about 2011 and 2016, all of the World Service was paid for by the licence fee. So it was originally paid for by a block grant from the Foreign Office. That ended in 2014, and it was then wholly funded by the licence fee. We've now slightly changed again because the government's put in additional investment mainly for these new language services. So there is a mixed funding model between the licence fee and the government, but there is a guarantee of editorial independence. So the government give us the money, but we get to say what goes on the output. That's as it should be. But the question you ask is very redolent, which is, what is the value to my mum, who lives in Dorset in the UK, of the Arabic TV platform she can neither watch nor understand? And that is a question we ask ourselves a lot. Now, we do think there is a lot of value to the UK audience, and we think they understand that contract pretty well when we've surveyed it. And the nature of it is that, firstly, our investment in international services in different languages strengthens our news gathering ability as an organisation right across the piece. So BBC Arabic have transformed our reporting of the Middle East quite clearly. The extra investment in BBC Arabic has enabled us to have cameras and people on the ground in all kinds of places we couldn't otherwise have done. And obviously that goes equally for the Burmese service or for our new African services, the new services we're launching in India. You know, the fact that we're going to have a Marathi TV programme, a 10-minute daily Marathi TV bulletin, means we'll be just gathering an awful lot more pictures in Mumbai than we were ever able to do before. So firstly, it's the domestic audience will see the benefits, literally. The second is that a rather more sort of sophisticated point about soft power, isn't it? And what reception do you get if you're a British person and you travel outside the UK? And I sort of constantly overuse this phrase, but I think, you know, there are three things that absolutely determine how you're received as a UK citizen abroad, and those three things are the BBC, the Premier League, and the Royal Family. And broadly, if you are a UK citizen abroad, you are fundamentally more likely to get treated well if you get in a tight spot, or even if you don't get in a tight spot, because we have these kind of incredibly powerful soft power institutions that reflect, at some level, British values and Britishness around the world, not in a sort of terrible post-colonial way that we have sometimes been accused of, but in a way that values partnership, that values working with journalists. You know, we're here working with journalists from your local market who we've hired to work for the BBC, but we want those journalists to tell us what we should be doing. I said this to the people who are joining us this morning. I said, don't come in and feel that you should be shaping yourselves to what you imagine the BBC should be. You're here to tell us what we don't know and how we should shape our services. And the BBC's relationship with journalists around the world, whether we employ them directly or whether we work in partnership with them, or whether we're nominally competitors with you, or whether we're just hanging out having a drink together, is the same. We're all in the same trade, and we value each other's insights and creative partnership. And I think UK audiences, to answer your question, I think UK audiences understand that the BBC is a valuable tool in how people perceive their country around the world, whether they travel or not. And actually, although we worried about it a bit when we took on the World Service funding for licence fee, we worry about it less now than we might have done.
Can I just a follow-up question is that I don't disagree with what you say, and I think I would concur with you. With regard to the soft power part, for example, when we had Occupy Central, the mainland Chinese government very much felt that there was foreign influence with regard to how this was instigated and whatever. So does that in any way affect, that kind of attitude, does it affect the BBC being able to broadcast in China? Is that part of the...
Well, the BBC can't currently really broadcast inside mainland China. Some of our English services, the English website is available. and unblocked. We have a TV distribution deal for international hotels only, and that's about it. And a lot of the Chinese language service is blocked online. Look, I think, you know, when you work for the BBC World Service, you begin to realise that having tough and difficult relationships with individual governments just goes with the territory. You know, if we were interested in a quiet life, we would broadcast to North America and stable countries in Western Europe and Central Europe. And we would just spend we would just make money in the American market, you know. But that's not what the BBC's for. The BBC isn't here to have a quiet life. That's why we've been broadcasting in Burma for generations. That's why we're opening a Korean language service for North Korea. You know, that's why we have a commitment to broadcasting to audiences of news need, audiences who have no other choice. They don't have access to free and independent news. That's part of the BBC's values. It's a really important part of like why we get up in the morning to do what we do. It's one of the great things about working for a World Service Group. So, you know, these things come and they go, and sometimes we have really long-standing relationships with broadcasters and they just get pulled off air overnight because of some local political tension, and they never recover. And that is sad because our audiences lose out. But you've just got to keep breathing in and out and keep doing what we do and hope that in the long term audiences around the world see and feel the benefits of that. Raymond.
Okay, my turn. Raymond Lee used to be working for the BBC for many years. Until last year, I became a lecturer here at Hong Kong Baptist University. Okay, you just talk about the news services. I just wonder, I know the BBC World Service were given money by the government to launch Korean language service. Could you actually update us on the latest development, when and how you're going to launch the service? And also, are you confident of reaching those audience inside North Korea? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So it launches, I think the digital launch is in the autumn. I was very privileged to meet the new journalists who are going to make up the Korean service. They were doing their training in London a couple of weeks ago. I met with them and the Director General. He welcomed them personally, and we set them on their way to what their really important mission. And in a sense, North Korean, the Korean service is the kind of acme of the news need audience. We might never reach a really large number of people in North Korea, but we have to try, right? That's why we're doing it. And the beauty of the non-commercial model, we're not doing it. There is no commercial space that would make sense to try this. It has to be a kind of world service type mission, and we're doing it because it matters. Because you can see the malign effect of the Korean Peninsula tensions all across this part of the world. Wouldn't it be great if they started to go away over time? We think that access to impartial and independent news for North Koreans is potentially a way of de-escalating that. It's a long march, it's a long route to get there, but we're very proud in Burma of what's happened in Burma. In the period that we've been broadcasting there, not a perfect situation, but a situation where there's a massively more liberal media climate than ever there was, and the BBC's been in broadcasting in Burmese every step of the way. So we see models for it having succeeded, but it's a long route. In answer to your question, we're going to broadcast on medium wave. I don't want to give all the details away in case there's someone going to phone the North Pyongyang and they can work out how to stop us. But we will do broadcast, but we will also try and promote the sharing of material, sort of samizdat style material on storage devices or whatever, because we understand there is a large diaspora group of North Koreans inside China, for example, and that there is correspondence across the border. People can move in and out of North Korea into the Chinese diaspora space, for example, even when they can't move into the south, across the South Korean border. So we don't think it's a wholly impermeable border. We think it's going to be really difficult, and we're also very mindful that we don't want audience members to put themselves in danger. I don't think the North Koreans will be very pleased to find North Koreans listening to a BBC radio broadcast. But if you adopted a completely caution-first principle, we wouldn't even try. And we think the fact that we are trying is a good thing, and we're really proud of it. Yeah.
Yes, hi, Sarah Stewart from AFP. If we can go back to Trump and futurology, a lot of American media have experienced a huge Trump bump with big subscription increases and so on. Obviously, the BBC doesn't have that kind of financial model. But how much of an impact have you seen on news consumption since Trump came to power?
Yeah.
And also, more broadly, are you concerned about some of the predictions that people are giving that the huge interest in the Trump car crash is just a sort of short-term band-aid over the malaise of the news industry, and that when we get a more traditional, boring administration led by Mike Pence, for instance, that we could see the news industry continue its steep decline?
Yeah, okay, so it's a complicated question. Yes, we've seen quite a significant uptick in audiences, particularly around the set-piece events. So some of our record days for traffic, web traffic, for example, came around the inauguration and, of course, the election itself. So the story has enormous legs. It's massively popular with audiences. We're just doing a lot of it, as I'm sure every other news organisation is. It's really interesting, isn't it? With America's long-term problems with its own media is whether that was caused by the political polarization of the country. You know, which came first, the political polarization of America or the polarization of its news media? It's impossible to say, but both things have moved lockstep together, right? There's a lack of a kind of center space in American politics where people come together across political divides, both in the media space and in the political space. And I think in the long term, this is a problem that Americans will probably want to fix for themselves. It's not really for the BBC to tell them how to do that, but I think it's not a particularly controversial observation to say, those of us who kind of go to America regularly, you know, it just seems a lot more polarized than ever it used to. And in time, there will have to be some structural change. What the impact of that will be on the news industry, it's hard to say. I was very interested to see how cheery people from the New York Times are looking these days. So the New York Times think their subscription model is working and that it's going to work very well. And I think they've said publicly that they're planning for a world in which print advertising goes to zero. And you may well be planning, if you know, as a sort of contingency for the same thing in the Wall Street Journal, right? Because whatever happens, that kind of classified print advertising model is not coming back anytime soon. And I think it'll be interesting to see how, as you say, as audiences settle down to quote normal behaviour, what the impact will be on American commercial broadcasters. We're very lucky because although we run a commercial operation in North America, effectively a lot of the content is provided by things we make anyway for the UK audience. So we don't have to make more money out of North America, though we're always keen to do so in the commercial part of the business. Yes.
Hi, Matt Walsh with RTHK and the University of Hong Kong.
Matt, I was interviewed on RTHK this afternoon by Phil.
By Phil?
By Phil, yeah, no, it was very pleasant, so thank you. Yeah.
Glad to hear that. I wanted to return to the audience growth figures you had on earlier. The TV growth was really remarkable. Can you attribute that to anything firmer or more specific than you're talking about the compelling nature of the big screen and the aspirational nature of TV news literacy? Is there something firmer?
Yeah, well, partly it's just because we're just making more TV. You know, we're making a lot of language, vernacular language TV that we weren't making a generation ago. So there's more of it about. Our distribution is improving. But also, as I talked about, the aspirational nature of international news TV and of TV generally, there is a growing global middle class, and TV ownership of a large high-end television and a bundle that goes with it is an important part of what people see as enjoying the proceeds of growing economic well-being. And that is a good thing for the TV industry as a whole. And it's one of the reasons that I think we just see more and more people coming to international news channels because more people can get them. And that is one of the things I don't actually see changing. I think there are huge structural challenges to that, as I've discussed with Netflix and so on. But basically, there's going to be more news there's going to be more channels, there's going to be more availability of those channels, and as people get wealthier, they'll have more TVs and more satellite boxes. So I think a lot of it is that, and in particular in this part of the world, you know, Asian economies, Asian countries that are getting quite a lot wealthier quite quicker, those are the real engines of growth rather than more saturated, mature TV markets like North America or Australia or the United Kingdom or Western Europe, for example. You'll all be knackered, so shall I do one or two more and then we can have a drink?
It's not a question, actually. It's just a comment about the BBC's aim to make broadcast available in North Korea. After Enver Hoxha in Albania opened up, I took this adventure group into Albania. Not many people had gone in since it had opened up, and we had a tour guide who astonishingly had absolutely wonderful English. And she taught herself by listening to the BBC World Service. So that's how she learned her English. So, you know, very positive.
I was talking to Howard Zhang, who's here, who's the head of the Chinese service, was telling stories of listening to BBC Chinese inside China when he was a young man on a shortwave radio, and what that meant to him. And it's something that, like, when you're having a bad day at the office, basically, these things are really inspirational to us. It's why we're really lucky to do what we do, because it makes a huge difference. Yeah, just a quick one.
So could you, when you're in charge of the World Service Radio, could you keep up the quality so people enunciate their consonants?
Oh, no more mumbling,
And sort of dumber down of some programs, you know, which are a bit concerning. And things like Boston Calling, what on earth is that doing on the World Service?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have soft power, you know, you should be really using it, not sort of trending towards what colloquial English people are speaking in England. You should be thinking about the Chinese person who's learning English by listening to your station.
That is true. I think it's the BBC is not able to single-handedly uphold standards of global spoken English, but I think you're right, it should be an aspiration. I also, no, I understand.
You're saying people tune into your channel because it is, well, you mentioned the Queen, and you mentioned the Premier League, like the news, the non-fake news is the BBC, so that's the English they listen to. So the quality of the sound of people's voices is extremely important.
I understand that, but someone else asked a question over here about, you know, who presents on the World Service, and the range of sounds of voices needs to be very wide. The standard of English needs to be very high, but the two, I think, are not mutually exclusive. Mumbling is a problem in domestic radio as it is in international radio. As I speak with experience from the Today programme, people constantly complaining that they couldn't hear what the presenters are saying because they're mumbling. Sorry, you're waiting very patiently to answer a question.
I was just wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most underreported story in the world today?
Yeah, that's a really good. The most underreported story in the world today. Well, I was so partly is what we've just been talking about. It's been in North Korea. So I think inside North Korea is, you know, there are still hidden spaces in world news which we can only really speculate about. So the kind of Korean Peninsula tension thing is massively, in some senses, over-reported some days. But actually, what is it like to live inside North Korea is something that I would be really fascinated to know. And I think also I am concerned that the sort of long-term economic growth in developing countries is overshadowed by reporting of acute problems and crises. So I think all news suffers from this, which is that we report bad things when they go wrong very effectively, but we don't report kind of incremental change for the better very well. And I think, I don't know whether any of you are aware of this, whether you're aware of Hans Rosling, who died this year as a fantastic Swedish statistician and public health doctor who delighted in going around the world telling anyone who'd listen how vastly quickly the quality of life and economic well-being and life expectancy and maternal health and mortality rates had improved, particularly in Asia. So he was a great advocate of what the kind of Asian miracle. And he used to go around kind of news trade conferences and ask journalists what the average life expectancy in Vietnam was, and we'd all say, oh, it's sort of 58, and he'd say, no, it's 85. And his point was a challenge to journalists that we are very poor at reporting things that are going well, and that this allows our audiences to have a mistaken impression of what the world is really like. And I do think as a sort of barometer for our journalists doing their job properly, it should be when people travel to other places in the world, do they recognise what they see based on what they've seen on the news? And I think when we failed, the answer to that question is no, and we should make sure the answer is yes more often. I need a drink, so so I'm going to thank you all for your attention, and I'm available for any private bugbears you wish to exercise on me in the bar. And Juliana, I'm delighted that your presidency has got off to, not referring to myself here at all, but your presidency got off such a fantastic start. Juliana's been in the job for 2 months. 2 months, you said?
2 months.
2 months as president of the FCC. You're extremely lucky to have her. Thank you, and to all the committee for inviting me here. It's been an immense honour and privilege, and I've actually genuinely enjoyed what's been some very testing questions. And if I said anything stupid, could you not tweet it? Because I'd quite like to not be rung by the press office at 3 o'clock in the morning asking whether I said such and such a daft thing. Yeah, no, I know we're on the record, but just, be gentle with me if I let anything slip. So thank you very much for having me this evening. It's been very privileged.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for being so game and satisfying our curiosity on so many levels. This is a token of our thanks. And I just want to say, as a very, small anecdote, even though BBC News is essentially blocked in China, every single translator, official translator of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, every single one of them listens to Radio 4, and that is the standard of English that they aspire to. So they know BBC very well, even though it's not available in the country generally. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you guys downstairs at the bar. Thank you.